Jonathan, really good to see you this morning. First of all, just tell us about this new deal. Specifically, you want to raise the national minimum wage, which at the moment is £8.91 for those who are over the age of 23.
Yes, good morning. Nice to be talking to you about this today. We set out a conference, quite a comprehensive package of employment rights and better terms and conditions for working people. You're right to say on the minimum wage we want to see it at £10 an hour. Yes, that's a rise from the existing adult rate of £8.91 an hour. But don't forget there are age differentials in the minimum wage as well. So for instance, an 18 to 20-year-old, it's only £6.56. So there'd be quite a substantial rise for a lot of workers if that was enacted. And specifically on this issue of fire and rehire, which we're all unusually here in the House of Commons on a Friday today to try and pass a private member's bill for. This is the practice of an employer unilaterally sacking the workforce and seeking to re-employ them with fewer terms and conditions and often less pay. We've seen it used in quite a few cases, and my colleague Barry Gardiner has brought a really well-drafted piece of legislation to Parliament today. It recognises there are times when businesses do need to reorganise, but it sets in place how that should happen through consultation, negotiation, a transparent process, and then we'll put penalties in place if that wasn't followed. So I think that the balance is absolutely right in what Barry Gardiner is proposing today. It would make a big difference to millions of people. So I really hope every member of Parliament is going to get behind this today.
Well, we'll be following the discussions later on. I just want to ask you about something very pressing that lots of our viewers have emailed in this morning to say they're concerned about. This idea of potentially looming restrictions. Do you think it is right that as of today, let's say, we move to Plan B?
Well, I don't want to see more restrictions because an area like mine, you obviously know parts of the country had local lockdowns before the national lockdown, so it's very hard. Plan B, as the government describes it, contains some measures like mask wearing, a bit more flexibility in terms of working from home, which we always wanted to see in Plan A. But in terms of what the government has in its Plan A, which is a focus on boosters and vaccination for children as well, that isn't on track. I mean, that's the crucial message the government have got to get hold of. We need 500,000 booster shots a day being delivered. It's not even at half that. You know, about a quarter of the infections each day are children. The vaccination of children is behind schedule. They can't use, for instance, the walk-in vaccination centres. So the government needs to crack on and deliver Plan A. But I do think Plan B has some sensible measures in it, which frankly are ones you could enact at low cost to people, mask wearing being the biggest example of that. And they should have been the plan all along. There's just been too much complacency, I think, from the government.
So in your field, Jonathan, would you recommend working from home?
Well, for a Member of Parliament, I think there are measures that we can put in place, for instance, mask wearing in the chamber, which would make it a bit easier. The crucial thing is really about flexibility. There are some sectors, if a business thinks it needs, for safety reasons, to be able to do that, they should have the choice of doing that. I don't really understand, to be honest, the slightly strange calls from Cabinet Ministers, a sort of a declaration of war on working from home. I mean, many people worked from home quite productively during the lockdown. Not for everyone. I mean, you've got to recognise for some manufacturing business, for instance, that would be much harder to do. So flexibility is the crucial thing. The message from the beginning of the start of this winter has really been, I think, too complacent from the government. It's been one of, this is all over, you've got nothing to worry about. Now, that frankly, unfortunately, isn't the case. And of course, if the government loses control, then you have to start.
In terms of complacency, looking back at, let's say, the Labour Party conference, do you think maybe there should have been a few more masks being worn?
Well, there were a lot of masks being worn at Labour Party conference, but also, of course, you had to show a double vaccine status to enter the conference centre or a negative COVID test. So there were the kind of measures in place which, frankly, over in this place in Parliament, nothing like that on that scale. And I think from people like Jacob Rees-Mogg, who are responsible for Parliament, just an unacceptable attitude that doesn't recognise the level of risk that is there. But, sometimes when we get these questions, this kind of whataboutery, we saw an event, was that sufficient? The point is now we're running at over 40,000 infections a day. Let's recognise that. Let's put in place the things that are not heavy cost to people, that can try and tackle that, try and keep that down, so we don't have to consider, frankly, far more difficult things in future. I just think that's an obvious low-cost position for the government to take, and I'd like to see a bit more urgency from them in responding to that.
And just finally, Jonathan, it's been a really difficult week. And just in terms of your own working practices, we know that many MPs have been putting in place different provisions to just try and make sure you can get about your day-to-day and do so and stay safe. Have you changed anything about how you're operating in respect of what happened last week?
Yeah, well, thank you for asking that, because it has been a difficult week, well, I think for the whole country, when something as shocking as the events of last Friday occur. For me, my friend Joe Cox was a close personal friend, and when that happened 5 years ago, there were things that I had to do, not drastic things, slightly different things in terms of doing the job and being aware of the risk to staff as well, which is a big thing that many MPs are understandably concerned about. So, I feel I've got in place the right package of procedures that let me do my job, access my constituents, let them access me, and handle that in the right balance. But of course, we don't go into the details of these things for obvious reasons. When you've had something as shocking as last week, there are always things you've got to look at and maybe consider doing things slightly differently, whilst maintaining the core part of being a Member of Parliament, which is being out and being able to talk to your constituents and have that relationship with them.
So you will be continuing with face-to-face meetings?
Yes, yeah. I think that is a very important part of the job. I think there are things that we do to make sure, first of all, frankly, you're speaking to the people who really need to see you, and that requires, dealing with cases in a certain way. But, one of the difficult things as a Member of Parliament during some of the COVID pandemic has been we couldn't access the public in the same way, of course. We couldn't have those kind of normal public events. And I do think that is an important part of the job. A Friday here being in Parliament, as you know, is very unusual for a private member's bill. Usually we'd all be at home doing our surgeries, doing our usual community functions, our visits to schools and businesses. And that's not going to change. But within that, there's some good advice to follow. There's, certainly I have a very good relationship with my local police force in Greater Manchester, who are very good at giving advice and making sure we're aware of how to do our jobs in a safer way as possible. Now, I think it's right the Home Secretary is reviewing all that, because how can you not review that after what happened last week? But yes, I don't want to cut myself off from the public. I'd find it very hard. I'd find it actually not just difficult to do the job, but I wouldn't enjoy it in the same way if we had that situation. So getting that balance right, it's not going to be easy, but I don't see a situation where we're cut off from the public. I just don't see how the job could work in that way.
Yeah, really good to talk to you this morning. Thank you so much for joining us, Jonathan. That is Labour's Shadow Work and Pension Secretary.